I always thought Hannah and I were solid. You know, one of those couples everyone looked at and said, they've got it all figured out. We'd been married for 7 years, and I never thought in a million years that she'd be the type to cheat. But then I started noticing the small things, the late nights, the constant texting, her laughing at her phone more than she ever did with me. It wasn't enough to scream affair right away, but something was off. The real clue came when she told me she was working late again. Now, I'm not one of those paranoid husbands, but this was like the 5th time in 2 weeks. So, I decided to check her phone when she left it on the counter while she showered. I'm not proud of it, but I'm glad I did. That's when I saw it. Jason. Some guy I'd never even heard of, sending her messages that were way too friendly for coworkers. My gut told me everything I needed to know, but I wasn't ready to blow it all up right then. I wanted proof, real, undeniable proof. I'm not the type to jump to conclusions, even when they're staring me in the face. So, I started watching. She didn't even notice I'd become more distant, more calculating. Every time she said she was going somewhere, I'd track her phone. She was going to places that weren't even close to her office or meetings. After a couple of weeks, I had enough evidence to fill a binder. Texts, locations, and even a few pictures I managed to snap when I followed her and Jason out to dinner one night. They didn't even try to hide it. At that point, it wasn't about just me anymore. Her family deserved to know what kind of person she had become. So, I pulled them into it. I showed them the evidence. Her mom cried. Her dad couldn't even look at the pictures. They were just as blindsided as I was, but they didn't blame me. We all agreed that Hannah needed to face this head-on, and there was no way I was letting her lie her way out of it. Once her family was on board, the plans started coming together. We weren't just going to let her get away with this in private. No, she needed to feel the weight of what she did, not just to me, but to all of us. Her parents were devastated, and her younger sister, Emma, couldn't believe it either. They were all in. We decided to confront her in a way she couldn't ignore, couldn't manipulate, and definitely couldn't run from. Hannah had no idea that I knew. She kept sneaking off with Jason, thinking I was clueless. It was almost insulting how little she thought of me, like I wasn't even worth being careful for. I kept playing the part of the unsuspecting husband while behind the scenes, I was putting together the final act. The opportunity came when I overheard her talking to Jason about some fancy restaurant downtown. Apparently, they were planning another one of their secret dates. Upscale place, low lighting, and lots of privacy for a couple who wasn't supposed to be seen together. Perfect. I told her I'd be out of town that weekend for work, and she didn't even hesitate to tell me to have a good trip. She probably thought it was the perfect time to spend a carefree evening with her boy toy. The stage was set. I called up her parents and Emma and told them to meet me at the restaurant that night. We were going to catch her in the act, but before we even walked through those doors, I had one last move to make. As Hannah and Jason sat there in their cozy corner booth, probably laughing at some inside joke, I sent her a text. Enjoying your dinner? Her reply came almost instantly. What do you mean? I could picture the panic on her face as she looked around the restaurant, trying to figure out if I was nearby. She didn't know yet that I was closer than she thought. I didn't respond to her text right away. I wanted her to sweat it out a bit, feel the tension rising. It was only a matter of time before she started spiraling. I was sitting in my car across the street, watching them through the window. She was already shifting in her seat, fidgeting with her phone while Jason just kept eating like nothing was wrong. I almost felt bad for him, too clueless to realize the storm that was about to hit. Almost. 5 minutes later, her family walked into the restaurant, right on cue. I could see Hannah's face drain of color when she spotted them. Her parents, who adored her, now couldn't even look at her the same way. And Emma, well, she was the type who used to look up to Hannah, thinking she was some perfect role model. All of that was about to come crashing down. I stayed back for a minute, letting them get settled, letting Hannah squirm. She was texting me again. What's going on? Are you here? I didn't answer. I wanted her to feel completely alone. I waited until her family sat down at a table not far from where she and Jason were. Hannah kept glancing over, trying to act normal, but you could see the panic in her eyes. Jason still hadn't caught on. He was too busy talking, probably about something as stupid as their future together. Then I walked in. I didn't make a scene right away. Just calmly walked through the restaurant like I was any other customer. But the second Hannah saw me, she froze. She didn't even try to hide her shock. her mouth half open like she was about to make some excuse. I gave her a little nod, like, yeah, I'm here. I could see her trying to process it all, me, her family, all sitting just a few feet away. I didn't go to her table. I didn't have to. I sat with her parents and Emma, who were dead silent, waiting for her to explain herself. She was caught, and there was no way out. Jason finally noticed something was up when Hannah grabbed her phone, staring down at it like it would magically erase everything. He asked her what was wrong, and that's when she lost it. I need to go, she stammered, getting up from the table. But I wasn't about to let her run. I stood up, blocking her path. Leaving so soon, Hannah? She stopped dead in her tracks, eyes wide like a deer in headlights. You could practically see the gears in her head turning, trying to come up with some lie that would make it all go away. Jason, still clueless, stood up beside her, looking between us like he was the one who needed an explanation. Lucas, what are you doing here? Her voice was shaky, trying to sound calm but failing miserably. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her for a second, then glanced at Jason. Enjoying dinner, Jason? He blinked, clearly confused, but before he could answer, Hannah tried to take control of the situation. Lucas, I can explain, she started, stepping closer to me, but I took a step back, holding up my hand. Explain what? I said, my voice low but firm. That you've been sneaking around behind my back for months? That this whole time, you've been lying to me and your family. I pointed toward her parents, who were sitting there, staring at her like she was a stranger. That's when it hit Jason. His eyes darted between Hannah and me, then over to her family. The realization spread across his face, and he stepped back, almost stumbling into his chair. You didn't tell him, did you? I asked, my eyes locked on Hannah. She was still trying to come up with something, but nothing was coming out. I watched her squirm, her face turning red as the weight of the situation pressed down on her. Jason, finally starting to understand the gravity of it all, looked at Hannah. Wait, what is he talking about? His voice was shaking now, panic creeping in. You said your husband was away. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, she's good at that. She's been telling a lot of people a lot of things. Isn't that right, Hannah? She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Her eyes flicked toward her parents, who looked utterly shattered. Her mom had tears in her eyes, and her dad was just shaking his head, like he couldn't believe the daughter he thought he knew had turned into this. Then Jason's phone buzzed. It was like a switch flipped in his head. He fumbled to pull it out, looked at the screen, and his whole demeanor changed in an instant. He didn't even look back at Hannah. Just grabbed his jacket and muttered, I have to go. Jason, wait, Hannah reached out, but he was already walking out the door, leaving her standing there, alone in front of everyone. When Jason bolted, I saw the desperation hit her. She stood there for a second, hand still half reaching out like she could somehow pull him back. But he was gone, and now she was left standing in front of everyone with nowhere to hide. Hannah, her mom's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. What have you done? It was like the dam broke. Hannah spun around, looking at her family with this wild, frantic look in her eyes, like she was drowning and reaching for any lifeline she could grab. Mom, Dad, please. It's not what it looks like. I can explain everything. Her dad's face was stone cold, his arms crossed over his chest. Don't you dare lie to us again. She flinched like he had slapped her, but she didn't stop. I didn't mean for this to happen, she stammered, trying to find the right words. It's complicated. Complicated. Emma cut in, her voice sharp, standing up now. You're cheating on your husband. How is that complicated? Hannah's eyes darted between all of us, and I could see the cracks starting to form. The cool, calm, collected person she tried to be was crumbling in front of me. The real her, the liar, the manipulator, was standing there, exposed. She wasn't going to talk her way out of this one. She started, then stopped, like she realized there was nothing she could say that would make this better. I was going to tell you, Lucas. I just needed time to figure things out. Figure things out? I repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity. You've had months, Hannah. Months of sneaking around, lying to my face, lying to your family. Were you trying to figure out how long you could get away with it? She dropped her head, eyes filling with tears, but I wasn't buying it. Not this time. I trusted you, I said, my voice low but full of the anger that had been building inside me for so long. I gave you every part of me, and this is how you repay me? By running off with some guy, lying to my face every chance you get. Her tears started to fall, but there was no sympathy left in me. Not after everything I'd found out. Her mom was sobbing now, and even her dad, who had been holding it together, looked like he was about to lose it. And that's when I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope. "Here," I said, tossing it on the table in front of her. "I've already signed. You'll find the divorce papers inside." Her eyes went wide as she stared at the envelope, like it was some kind of bomb that had just been dropped in her lap. "Divorce," she whispered, almost like she didn't believe it. "Yes, divorce," I snapped. "This marriage? It's over." For a moment, everything went dead silent. The whole restaurant seemed to freeze, like time had stopped. Hannah stood there, staring at the divorce papers like they were going to burn a hole through the table. The reality of it finally started sinking in. There was no coming back from this. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Lucas, please. We don't have to do this." She reached for my arm, her eyes wide with panic. "I made a mistake. I was confused, but I love you. We can fix this." I yanked my arm away before she could touch me. Don't you dare try to play the "I love you" card now," I said, my voice shaking with the rage I'd kept bottled up for too long. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You've been lying to my face for months. There's no fixing this, Hannah." Her tears came faster now, dripping down her cheeks, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. She was crying for herself, for the mess she made, not for what she'd done to me. And I wasn't about to let her twist things around like she always did. Her dad, who had been quiet this whole time, finally spoke up, his voice trembling with anger. "Hannah, how could you do this? To Lucas? To all of us?" His hands were clenched into fists on the table, knuckles white. "We raised you better than this. Your mother and I, we trusted you. And this is how you repay us." Hannah turned toward him, sobbing now. "Dad, please, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Didn't mean to." Emma cut in, her voice ice cold. "You destroyed him, Hannah. Destroyed your own family. Do you even get that?" Hannah couldn't respond. She just shook her head, like none of this was real, like she could still wake up from this nightmare. But there was no waking up. This was real, and she had no one to blame but herself. I let out a deep breath and stood up. I'd had enough. "This is over, Hannah. I've given you enough chances, enough time. I'm done." I could see the shock on her face as I turned to walk away. She wasn't used to me standing up for myself like this. She thought she could manipulate me, twist me around her finger like she had in the past. But not anymore. "Lucas, wait, please don't leave me," she cried, stepping toward me like she could still stop this from crashing down. I paused for a second, not even looking back at her. "You left me long before I ever got here." With that, I walked out of the restaurant, leaving her standing there, alone and shattered, as her world crumbled around her. Her family stayed behind, still trying to process what had just happened. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of her lies, her betrayal, it was all gone. And for the first time in a long time, I was free. I walked out of that restaurant, and it felt like I could finally breathe again. All the anger, the hurt, it was still there, but at least now I was the one in control. I didn't have to sit around, wondering when the next lie was coming or whether she'd sneak off with Jason again. It was over. Done. As I headed to my car, I half expected her to come running after me, begging for forgiveness. But she didn't. And honestly, I was glad. I didn't want to hear another excuse or empty promise. I got in the car and sat there for a second, staring at the steering wheel. This was it. The end of the marriage I'd spent years building, gone in one night. And yet, there wasn't any sadness. Just this strange sense of relief. A text came through on my phone. I thought maybe it was Hannah trying to reach out, but when I looked down, it was Emma. "Thank you for doing this," she'd written. She needed to face what she's done. "We're all so sorry." I stared at the message for a second, and a wave of emotions hit me. Her family didn't deserve this either. They had stood by me through all of it, probably feeling just as betrayed as I did. I texted her back a quick, "Thanks. I'm sorry you all had to see that." I wasn't sure what Hannah's life would look like after this. Her family? They wouldn't look at her the same way again. And Jason? Well, he ran off the second things got real, so good luck with that. As I sat there, My phone buzzed again. This time, it was her. Lucas, I'm so sorry. Please, just talk to me. I didn't want this to happen. I love you. Don't give up on us. I let the message sit there. I wasn't going to respond. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I drove home in silence, my mind replaying everything that had just happened. When I walked through the front door, the house felt different. Quieter. Emptier. But it didn't feel like the place where I'd been betrayed anymore. It was just mine again. I tossed my keys on the counter and sat down in the living room, staring at nothing in particular. It was strange, how quickly everything could fall apart, how one moment you're living in what you think is a happy marriage, and the next, you're signing divorce papers at a restaurant. But this wasn't my fault. That much was clear now. I gave everything to this marriage, and she threw it away for some guy who didn't even stick around. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Hannah. Please, Lucas. We can fix this. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to hear it. There was no fixing this. She'd had her chance, and she blew it. Sitting there in the quiet, I started thinking about the future, what it would look like without her in it. And you know what? For the first time in a long time, it didn't seem so bad. I'd wasted enough time on her lies. Now, it was time to start living for me again. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the blinds. It was strange. There was no dread, no sinking feeling in my stomach like I'd been living with for months. Just calm. Like the storm had finally passed, and now, it was just quiet. I checked my phone. 5 missed texts from Hannah, all more desperate than the last. Lucas, please. Don't do this. I'm begging you to talk to me. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I still love you. But the one that really hit me was the last one. I can't lose you. I set my phone down without replying. I didn't owe her anything anymore. Her words meant nothing after all she had done, and deep down, I think she knew that. The only reason she was fighting now was because her little world was crumbling, and she didn't know how to stop it. I poured myself some coffee and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street. It was a Sunday morning, and everything felt so still. No chaos, no lies, just peace. And I knew that I wasn't going to let her drag me back into that mess. Not again. Just as I was settling into the silence, my phone rang. It was Hannah's mom. Lucas, she said, her voice soft and tired. I just wanted to check on you. I know yesterday was hard for all of us. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I'm fine, honestly. I mean, as fine as I can be after all of this. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I don't know what to say. We're so disappointed in her. I didn't raise her to be like this. You've been nothing but good to her, and we've always considered you part of the family. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I knew they were angry at her, but hearing her mom say it out loud made it more real. I appreciate that, I said quietly. I really do. But this is on her. She made her choices. I know, she whispered. We're not making excuses for her. I don't know how we're supposed to move forward from this. You don't, I said, my voice firmer now. She has to face the consequences of her actions. This isn't something she can sweep under the rug. There was another pause. You're right. We'll stand by you, Lucas. Whatever happens, we'll support you. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. I had lost a wife, but somehow, I hadn't lost them. They were my family, even if Hannah wasn't anymore. I spent most of the day doing nothing, just letting it all sink in. I hadn't even started to think about what came next. I knew the divorce would be messy, no matter how much Hannah begged or tried to make amends. It wasn't going to change my mind. By the afternoon, I was ready to get out of the house, so I grabbed my jacket and took a drive. I didn't have a destination in mind, just needed to clear my head. The air was crisp, and as I drove with the windows down, I could feel the weight lifting, little by little. I ended up at a park on the edge of town. It was quiet, almost empty, just a few kids playing in the distance. I found a bench and sat down, staring out at the trees swaying in the breeze. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't even bother checking it. I knew it was Hannah, probably sending more apologies or trying to get me to talk. I wasn't ready to deal with her, not today. Maybe not ever. For now, I just wanted to sit there, soak in the quiet, and feel the freedom of finally being done with all of it. Sitting on that park bench, I started to wonder how long it had been since I felt like this, calm, without the constant weight of suspicion or the lies hanging over me. It felt foreign, but good. Like I was rediscovering what it was like to just exist without always waiting for the next blow. I stayed there for a while, just watching the world go by. It was the first time in months I wasn't obsessing over what Hannah was doing, who she was with, or what she was hiding. None of that mattered anymore. She wasn't my problem anymore. And that thought, that was liberating. Eventually, I pulled out my phone, bracing myself for more of her texts. There were a few missed messages, but this time they weren't just from Hannah. One was from Emma. "Hey, just wanted to check in on you. I know yesterday was rough. If you need to talk, I'm here." I stared at her message for a second, grateful that someone in that family still had my back. Emma had always been different from Hannah, more grounded, more honest. And now, after everything, she seemed like the only real connection I had left to that part of my life. I texted her back, "Thanks, Emma. I appreciate it. I'm doing all right, just trying to take it all in." A few minutes later, she responded, "I don't know how you're holding it together, honestly. We're all still in shock. I just can't believe she did this to you." I leaned back on the bench, letting out a deep breath. "Yeah, well, believe me, I'm still processing it too." Emma didn't text back right away, but I knew she would. She was always thoughtful like that, taking time to figure out what to say instead of just firing off a response. It was one of the things I appreciated about her. She didn't sugarcoat things, but she also didn't rush to judgment. After a few minutes, my phone buzzed again. "I know this might sound weird, but I'm proud of you, Lucas. I've never seen you stand up for yourself like that. It took guts to confront her the way you did." I smiled a little, even though she couldn't see it. It felt good to hear that, especially from her. "Thanks, Emma. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. It had to end." I sat there for a while longer, thinking about what she said. Maybe I hadn't realized it until now, but I really had let Hannah walk all over me for far too long. I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than confronting the truth, and look where that got me. By the time I left the park, I felt lighter. Not just because of what had happened with Hannah, but because for the first time in years, I was starting to feel like my own person again. I wasn't just Hannah's husband or the guy trying to keep a broken marriage together. I was Lucas Bennett, and I was done letting her define me. When I got home, the house felt different. Still quiet, still empty, but in a way that didn't bother me anymore. I liked the stillness now. It was mine. No more waiting for her to come through the door, no more wondering where she'd been or if she was lying to me. I checked my phone again. Another text from Hannah. "I can't believe you served me divorce papers like that. You didn't even give me a chance to explain." I rolled my eyes. A chance to explain? I gave her months, and all she did was keep lying, keep sneaking around. What else was there to say? The trust was broken, shattered beyond repair. I didn't reply. There was no point. She'd keep trying to spin the story, make herself the victim. But not anymore. She could deal with the fallout on her own. Instead, I texted Emma again. "Want to grab coffee sometime? Could use a friend." Her response came almost immediately. "Absolutely. Just say when." I met Emma for coffee the next morning at this small cafe downtown. It felt a little strange, sitting there with her after everything, but at the same time, it was nice to be around someone who knew the whole story and wasn't there to judge me. Emma had been the only one in Hannah's family who saw things clearly from the start. She'd seen through the lies long before the rest of them. She walked in, gave me a small smile, and sat down across from me. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice soft, genuinely concerned. I shrugged. "Honestly? I don't know yet. Part of me feels relieved, like I can finally breathe again. But another part of me is just tired." She nodded, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "Yeah, I can imagine. I still can't believe she did this. It's like she's not even the same person I grew up with." I took a sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth settle me a bit. "I don't think she is. I mean, maybe this has always been who she was, and I just didn't want to see it." Emma looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly, like she was thinking hard about something. "You know, Lucas, I've been trying to figure out how to say this, but I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. You did what a lot of people wouldn't have the guts to do." I let her words sink in for a moment. It felt good to hear, especially coming from someone who knew the situation as intimately as she did. Thanks, Emma. I didn't feel brave when I was doing it though. I just couldn't keep living like that. You shouldn't have to, she said firmly. You deserve better. We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, just sipping our coffee and watching the world go by outside the window. It was peaceful, and I realized how much I had missed just being around someone who wasn't constantly hiding something. No drama, no lies, just a real conversation. I can't believe Jason just bailed like that, Emma said suddenly, shaking her head. What a coward. I couldn't help but laugh a little. Yeah, that was something. I mean, he didn't even have the decency to stick around and face the mess he helped make. He's probably scared of the fallout, she said, rolling her eyes. Guys like him? They don't want anything to do with real consequences. I nodded, thinking about how quickly Jason had bolted the second things got tough. He wasn't much different from Hannah, really. Both of them wanted the fun without any of the responsibility. And now, they were stuck with the mess they created. As we talked, it became clear that Emma had been dealing with her own set of emotions about all of this. I hadn't thought about it before, but Hannah's betrayal didn't just hurt me, it tore a hole in her family too. How's your mom holding up? I asked. Emma sighed. Not great. She's been crying a lot. She can't wrap her head around it, you know? My dad's just angry. He barely says anything anymore. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't want to drag your family into this. Emma shook her head. Lucas, this isn't your fault. Don't even think that. Hannah did this, not you. If anything, we should have seen it coming. She's always been good at hiding who she really is. We fell into silence again, and for a moment, I thought about what it would have been like if I had just confronted Hannah early on. If I'd yelled, screamed, demanded the truth instead of carefully planning the whole thing. But then, I realized it wouldn't have changed a thing. She'd still be the same person, lying, sneaking around. Only now, it was all out in the open. Emma must have noticed I was lost in thought because she leaned forward, her voice gentle. You did the right thing, Lucas. Don't second-guess yourself. I gave her a small smile. Thanks. I didn't realize how much I'd let her control me. Hey, Emma said, reaching across the table and putting her hand on mine. That's done now. You're free. You don't owe her anything. She was right. I didn't owe Hannah a thing anymore. Not my time, not my energy, and certainly not my forgiveness. After we finished our coffee, Emma gave me a quick hug before we went our separate ways. It felt good to reconnect with someone who really understood what I'd been through. And for the first time since the whole ordeal began, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could start moving on. When I got home, the house felt even quieter than before, but this time, it didn't bother me. I liked the stillness. It gave me space to think, to clear my head. I spent the rest of the afternoon sorting through things, physically and mentally. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, but at least now, I was ready to face it. That evening, I sat down at the kitchen table and started going through the divorce papers again. There was something satisfying about seeing it in writing, that this was officially ending, that I was taking control of my life again. And as I signed my name on the final page, I knew one thing for sure, this was just the beginning of something new. Something better. A few days went by, and I barely heard from Hannah. Maybe she'd finally gotten the message, or maybe she was just trying to figure out her next move. Either way, the silence was exactly what I needed. I'd been living in her chaos for too long, and now I was starting to enjoy the quiet. I focused on work, trying to stay busy, but in the back of my mind, I knew the real challenge was going to come when I started dealing with the logistics of the divorce. There was no escaping that. I hadn't fully wrapped my head around the idea of splitting everything, our house, our accounts, all the little details that made up the life we'd built together. It felt like a lot, but at least I had something Hannah couldn't take from me, my peace of mind. One afternoon, as I was organizing some files at home, my phone buzzed. I figured it was probably more messages from her, but when I looked, it was her dad. "Can we talk?" was all he wrote. I hesitated for a second. I wasn't sure what he wanted to say, but I knew it couldn't be easy for him. After everything that had gone down, he must have felt just as blindsided as I did. So I texted him back, telling him I'd meet him at a diner near his house. When I walked into the diner, he was already sitting at a booth, staring down at his coffee like it held the answers he was searching for. He looked up as I approached, and I could see the weariness in his eyes. This whole thing had aged him in a way I hadn't noticed before. "Hey Lucas," he said, standing up to shake my hand. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded and slid into the booth across from him. "Of course. What's on your mind?" He took a deep breath, like he was still trying to find the right words. I don't know what to say, honestly. I feel like I failed you. I feel like I failed as a father." I shook my head. "This isn't your fault." He held up a hand to stop me. "I know you'll say that, but it sure feels like it. Hannah, she's our daughter. We should have seen the signs. I should have seen it. But we didn't, and now you're the one left picking up the pieces." His voice cracked a little at the end, and I could see how much this was hurting him. It wasn't just about me and Hannah anymore. It was about the damage she'd done to everyone around her, even the people who loved her unconditionally. "I don't blame you," I said quietly. "She's good at hiding things. Trust me, I didn't see it either, not until it was too late." He stared down at his coffee again, shaking his head. "I just don't understand how she could do this. To you, to her family, to herself. She's thrown everything away." We sat in silence for a while, neither of us sure how to fill the space between us. It was like we were both mourning the loss of the person we thought Hannah was, even if that person had never really existed. After a while, he spoke again, his voice low. "I just want you to know, whatever happens, we're still here for you. Your family, Lucas. We're not turning our backs on you because of her mistakes." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. Sure, I had lost my marriage, but I hadn't lost everything. I still had the people who cared about me, even if they shared a name with the person who had betrayed me. "Thank you," I said, meaning every word. "That means a lot." He nodded, finally looking up at me with something close to relief in his eyes. "You've always been good to us. We won't forget that." As we finished up our conversation, I realized that maybe I hadn't lost as much as I thought. Sure, my marriage was over, but I hadn't lost the relationships that really mattered. Hannah's family, they weren't abandoning me. They saw her for who she was, and they weren't letting her ruin the rest of us. When I got back home that night, I felt lighter. Not just because of the talk with her dad, but because it felt like everything was slowly falling into place. Piece by piece, I was moving forward. Of course, Hannah didn't make it easy. Later that night, she texted me again. "We need to talk, Lucas. This isn't how it's supposed to end." I stared at her message for a long time, not sure if I even wanted to respond. What more was there to say? The damage was done. There was no going back to what we were. But before I could overthink it, I typed out a response. "It ended the moment you started lying to me." I hit send and put my phone down, not waiting for her reply. I didn't need to. The truth was out there now, and nothing she said would change it. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. The days started blending together after that. Each one felt like another step away from the wreckage of my marriage, and I was okay with that. I threw myself into work, spent more time with friends, and even started to rediscover hobbies I'd neglected while I was too busy trying to hold my life together. Slowly, I was piecing things back, bit by bit. Of course, Hannah wasn't done trying to insert herself into my life. A week after our last text exchange, she showed up at my house. I wasn't surprised to see her, but I wasn't exactly thrilled either. I opened the door, and there she was, standing on the porch with that same desperate look in her eyes, like she thought there was still a way to fix this. "Lucas, we need to talk," she said, her voice softer than usual, almost pleading. I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms. "About what, Hannah?" "There's nothing left to say." Her eyes darted around, like she was searching for something to hold on to. I can't let it end like this. Please, can we just sit down and talk? I need you to hear me out." I should have slammed the door in her face, but part of me wanted to hear what ridiculous excuse or justification she'd come up with this time. So I stepped aside, letting her in. She looked around the house, almost like she was surprised to see that nothing had really changed. But then again, why would it? I was the one who'd stayed true. She was the one who walked away from everything. She sat down on the couch, and I took a seat across from her, keeping my distance. "All right, talk," I said, not bothering to hide the impatience in my voice. She took a deep breath, wiping at her eyes like she was trying to hold back tears. "Lucas, I never wanted it to go this far. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Jason. It was a mistake. I shook my head, already fed up. A mistake? Sleeping with him for months wasn't a mistake, Hannah. It was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to betray me. I know, she said, her voice cracking. I know I hurt you. Lucas, I was confused. I felt like something was missing in our marriage, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I could feel the anger rising in me again, but I kept my voice calm. Something was missing because you stopped putting in the effort. You checked out a long time ago, Hannah. Don't sit here and blame this on our marriage. This is on you. She started crying for real now, but I didn't move. I wasn't going to comfort her. Not after everything. I know, she sobbed. But we can work through this. I'll do anything. Therapy, whatever you want. I can fix this. Her words fell flat. It was like she couldn't accept that there was no fixing it, no matter how hard she tried to pretend otherwise. Hannah, it's over, I said, my voice steady but firm. I already told you, I've signed the papers. This marriage is done. Her sobs turned into desperate gasps for air as she buried her face in her hands. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for herself, for the life she destroyed with her own hands. After what felt like an eternity, she finally looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. So that's it? You're just walking away? After everything we've been through? I met her gaze, no longer feeling the guilt or the doubt that used to eat away at me. You walked away first, Hannah. I'm just catching up. She sat there, staring at me like she didn't recognize the person in front of her. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she still thought she could manipulate me, pull me back into her mess. But I wasn't that guy anymore. Please, Lucas, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Don't leave me like this. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I already have. Hannah stood up slowly, like her legs were made of lead. She looked around the house one more time, then back at me. I'm sorry, she said, her voice hollow. I really am. I didn't respond. I just opened the door, waiting for her to leave. After a long pause, she finally walked out, her head down, her shoulders slumped. And with that, she was gone. As the door clicked shut behind her, I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where she'd been. But instead of feeling sadness or regret, all I felt was relief. It was really over. The house was quiet after Hannah left, but this time, it didn't feel heavy. There was no tension hanging in the air, no weight pressing down on me like before. It was just peaceful. I walked over to the window and watched as she got into her car, still wiping her eyes. She sat there for a minute before finally driving away. I didn't feel anything as I watched her leave. No sadness, no anger. Just a sense of finality, like I'd closed the door on that chapter of my life for good. The part of me that had been wrapped up in trying to save our marriage, trying to save her, was gone. And I was okay with that. After she left, I spent the rest of the evening in a kind of quiet reflection. I thought back on all the signs I had ignored, the moments when I should have said something but didn't. It was crazy to realize how much I had let slide, how long I had convinced myself that things would get better, even when they were clearly falling apart. I went to bed that night feeling lighter, like I'd finally let go of something that had been dragging me down for years. And for the first time, I didn't dream about Hannah, or Jason, or any of the mess they'd created. I just slept. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. Lighter, maybe. Free. It was like I had finally let go of something I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. The sun was shining through the blinds, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had something to look forward to, even if I didn't know exactly what that was yet. I made a big breakfast, eggs, bacon, the whole deal. Sat down at the table with my coffee and just enjoyed the quiet. No distractions, no phone buzzing with Hannah's desperate texts. Just me and my thoughts, which for once, didn't feel like they were pulling me under. As I finished eating, my phone buzzed. For a second, I thought it might be Hannah again, but when I checked, it was a message from Emma. Hey, how are you feeling today? Want to grab lunch? I smiled at the message. Emma had been a rock through all of this, and I was grateful for her support. I quickly typed back, I'm good actually. Lunch sounds great. Let's do it. We met at the same cafe where we'd had coffee the week before. Emma was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table by the window, waving when she saw me walk in. I sat down across from her, and we ordered some food, making small talk for a bit before diving into the real conversation. "How did it go with Hannah?" she asked, her voice soft, but with that same directness I'd come to appreciate from her. I shrugged. It was pretty much what I expected. She came over, begged for another chance, said she was sorry. You know, the usual. Emma sighed, shaking her head. "She's really not getting it, is she?" "Nope," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But it doesn't matter anymore. I'm done." She looked at me, studying my face like she was trying to gauge how serious I was. "You really mean that, don't you?" I nodded. "Yeah, I do. It's over." A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "I'm proud of you, Lucas. I know this hasn't been easy, but you've handled it better than most people would." I felt a little warmth spread through me at her words. It was nice to hear someone say that, especially after months of feeling like I was losing control of my life. "Thanks, Emma. I wouldn't have gotten through it without you, though." She waved me off, but I could see the faint blush creeping up her cheeks. "You would've. But I'm glad I could help." We talked for a while longer, just about normal stuff, work, weekend plans, anything but the mess that had been dominating my life for too long. It felt good to have a conversation that wasn't about Hannah or the divorce. Just normal life. At one point, Emma leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "So what's next for you? I mean, now that you're officially moving on." I thought about that for a second. It was a question I hadn't really considered until now. What was next? The future was wide open, and for the first time, I wasn't trying to piece together a broken marriage or fix something that couldn't be fixed. I could actually focus on what I wanted. "I don't know," I admitted, shrugging a little. "But whatever it is, it's going to be on my terms." Emma grinned. I liked the sound of that. When I got home later that day, I felt different again. Lighter, more sure of myself. The past few months had been hell, but I was finally starting to see the other side. I had spent so much time wrapped up in trying to fix things with Hannah that I hadn't realized how much of myself I had lost in the process. But now, sitting there in the quiet of my house, I felt like I was finally finding my way back. As the sun set and the house grew dark, I sat on the couch and let the stillness wash over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was no more drama, no more lies, no more pretending. Just peace. A couple of weeks passed, and things finally started feeling normal again. It was strange, waking up without that knot in my stomach, without wondering what Hannah was doing or what new lie I'd uncover. The papers were signed, and I was officially free. One evening, I sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It felt good, being in this place where I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was actually starting to live again. The silence didn't feel heavy, it felt like peace. My phone buzzed, and for a second, I thought about ignoring it. But when I saw Emma's name flash on the screen, I smiled and picked up. "Hey, I was just thinking about you," she said, her voice light. "Yeah? Good thoughts, I hope." "Always," she laughed. "Want to grab a drink tonight?" I paused for a second, looking out at the last bit of sunlight fading away. I realized then that for the first time in months, I actually felt excited about something. Not about the past, not about what I'd lost, but about what was coming next. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "I'd like that." As I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, I realized something. The weight of what had happened, all the betrayal, the pain, it didn't define me anymore. I was moving forward, step by step, leaving the wreckage behind. And whatever came next, I knew it would be on my terms.